Hello, everyone. As you can tell, I'm in a completely different location. And so when I connected and I thought I set everything up, I was so excited to get things. And then I looked at my image and I feel like I am some kind of weird ghost. I feel like there's like this. I have two different lighting sources and they both are terrible. I forgot to bring my ring light with me when this is the thing about traveling. You're supposed to have a little like go-to pack, and I usually do, but this morning was a bit crazy. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I didn't set up I forgot my light, my fault. So I have to improvise here where I am, and I feel like I have this like bright, shiny light on me, and then all this darkness around me. This is crazy. And then I connected to the wrong stream. So I need to kind of go over and yeah, so I connected to the wrong stream. Or let's just say that I spent a few minutes talking to nobody because it was, yeah, the wrong stream. So anyways, that's it. That's done. We're here. We're fine. We're going to start. And today is Friday and it's another session of plant consciousness commentary. And I've got some good stuff. So I am going to get started. If you're new around here, besides the fact that I want you to do all the likes and, the subscribes and all those kind of fun stuffs, but just if you don't know who I am Tigria Gardenia. I am a nature-inspired mentor and a certified life coach. But in this capacity, I'm known as a world ambassador for plant intelligence for the last 10 years, at least. No, actually, for more than 10 years. I have been working with humans and plants to help you cultivate the elements of life which nourish your evolution. So I'm really excited to be here. Even when I'm traveling, I try to keep my schedule. Last week, I had no internet. Can you imagine? I live in the mountains. As you know, I live in Damanhur, which is in the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy. And living in an esoteric community has a lot of benefits. Internet is not one of them. It really isn't. Internet is a bit of a craziness piece to it. And so therefore, the week before, on Wednesday, my internet went down completely because the fiber line was cut when a storm caused damage. And so therefore it was cut. And of course, in a non-Italian context, if you have a bunch of towns where the fiber line has been cut and therefore they have no internet access, you would think that they would work on it until they got it fixed. But it's Italy, which means they worked on it on Wednesday until, time to go to bed, fine. Then they worked on it on Thursday, and then they worked on Friday, and then that's it. They didn't work on it on Saturday or Sunday. And yeah, we didn't get internet back for a while. So anyways, my cell service is pretty bad out there too. So I had to skip. So I hope you enjoyed your week off, but we're back. We're back with some really fun and interesting papers. So what I have an article, which is actually an article about a new book that just came. It's not about the book, but it's the same author as a new book that just came out about plants. So I found that the article is really interesting to sort of set us up for what we're going to talk about in the paper, because this is one of those a little bit heavier type of papers. Sometimes I have papers that are a little heavier. Sometimes the papers are a little softer or a little easier to understand. But this is a paper that requires a little bit of thinking through. So I find that this article is a great thing to kind of warm us up. Remember, as always, every time we have these conversations, if you want to continue the conversation, I highly encourage you to join the Naturally Conscious community. This is the premier ecosystem for human-plant relations and for really nourishing human-plant relations for planetary evolution. So I highly encourage you to come over and have these conversations inside of the Naturally Conscious community. This is just our place. We have lots of these conversations. I actually just got off of a call for our book club, and it was amazing because we're reading a book that honestly turned out to be a little bit like a little what's the word we were using? Superficial. So, and now we're actually having some really great conversations on a book. So taking a book that could have been a bit of a flop and having a really interesting conversation on it. So I'm very, very excited. And let's just get into this paper, because I think that this is going to be, again, it's going to lead us to some really interesting conversations. Now, today I've chosen the topic around the nervous system because, as you remember, we started off, when I started off all of this plant consciousness commentary, it really was around the topic of plant neurobiology and what is consciousness and what is intelligence and all these different aspects. It's still an argument among certain circles. In other circles, it's very much accepted, but in some circles, it's still very much a topic of conversation, which is extremely frustrating, to be honest. But that's okay. That's just what it is. And so we deal with it. We deal with it because that's all we can do. So, but we've gone through many different expanding subject matters around the topic of the human-plant relationship, and specifically plants as individual beings with agency and intelligence, and some going so far as consciousness. Today, we're sort of going to flip back into the realm. We're going to talk a little bit about still what are some of the controversies that are happening around the idea of plant consciousness plant intelligence. We're not even getting to consciousness. And then we're going to talk about a paper that came out around 2021 that talked about the fact that we cannot really have these conversations until we start to broaden our understanding of what nervous system is, because we have fixated too much on what the nervous system is. Now, as always, I haven't read all of these. I've just read the titles because I just wanted to prep them for us, because I want I want our experiences to be something that happens together. So let's get into, this paper. All right, let's get into this paper. So here we have a conversation. Okay, this is going to be a little tricky. I'm not used to doing this. I'm not used to doing this anymore with one monitor. So pardon me for a second as I flip through. Okay, perfect. Okay. So this paper came out in 2024. It's called The Mysteries of Plant Intelligence, and it was written by Zoë Schlanger. Now, 2024, Zoë Schlanger, she just recently published a book, which I'll talk about more later because I kind of want to get into this. But this is really interesting to me that in 2024, she's publishing this paper, The Mysteries of Plant Intelligence, which is very similar from the perspective of title-wise and some of the topics of, like, for example, Michael Pollan's paper and a few other papers that came out so many years ago. So I find that here's the thing. I find it somewhat disconcerting that we're still having, and I actually think that this is being in this moment perpetuated by the actual journalists themselves, calling that there's still a debate around plant intelligence. Okay, there is still somewhat of a debate around plant intelligence, but a lot of it is not a debate anymore. And I find that because these new journalists have just come into this conversation, they're writing these papers as if it's like, or these articles as if it's like a new conversation point. It's not. It's old. I wish we didn't even have to have it anymore. But because we do have to have it, let's get into it and let's see what she has to say. Let's see if she comes up with anything new. All right. So the mysteries of plant intelligence. Scientists are debating whether concepts such as memory, consciousness, and communication can be applied beyond the animal kingdom, by Zoë Schlanger, or Zoe, excuse me. On a freezing day in December, and I actually, hold on a second. Sorry, I just realized that this is bothering me. I don't always know how to close. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Just to give a little bit more space, because again, I only have one monitor today. On a freezing day in December 2021, I arrived in Madison, Wisconsin to visit Simon Gilroy's lab. By the way, Simon Gilroy is a really cool character. Very, very cool character. In one room of the lab sat a flat of young tobacco and Arabidopsis plants. Arabidopsis is a form of watercress. It's kind of like the model plant used in laboratory settings, each imbued with fluorescent proteins derived from jellyfish. And then they make Frankenstein plants. Annoying. Research led me into a small microscopic room. One of them turned off the lights, and another handed me a pair of tweezers that had been dipped in a solution of glutamate, one of the most important neurotransmitters in our brains. In our brains as in human brains. I wish you would just say human brains. And research has recently found one that boosts plant signals too. Research recently. I wish sometimes, that there's some words that I would like to get rid of. Recently is one of the words that I would like to get rid of or at least let me rephrase this. I'd like to have a context because this understanding of glutamate has been around for a while. Just so you know, a while. So it's a neurotransmitter that the human brain uses, and we find that it acts very similarly in the behavior that it generates in plants as well. Be sure to cross the midrib. Jessica Cisneros Fernandez, then a molecular biologist on Gilroy's team, told me. She pointed to the thick vein running down the middle of a tiny leaf. This vein, in the plant's information superhighway. Injure the vein, and the pulse will move all over the plant in a wave. I pinched hard. On a screen attached to the microscope, I watched the plant light up, its veins blazing like a neon sign. As the green glow moved from the wound site outward in a fluorescent ripple, I was reminded of the branching patterns of human nerves. The plant was becoming aware, in its own way, of my touch. But what exactly does it mean for a plant to be aware? Consciousness was once seen as belonging solely to humans, and a short list of non-human animals that clearly act with intention. Yet seemingly everywhere researchers look, they are finding that there is more to the inner lives of animals than we ever thought possible. Scientists now talk regularly about animal cognition. They study the behaviors of individual animals and occasionally ascribe personalities to them. Just only occasionally. Only occasionally. Some scientists now posit that plants should likewise be considered intelligent. Some, a lot, not some. Can we be a little bit more quantifiable? The vagueness of this is very frustrating. It's very frustrating because it makes it seem as if this is like a new conversation she just started. There are hundreds, if not more, of papers and art. No, there's way more than hundreds if I add papers and articles and research studies and conversation pieces and opinion pieces. We already have gone through almost 100 of them ourselves just in this plant consciousness commentary that I do every single week. Can you imagine how many more there are out there that I haven't read? So what are you talking about that like some scientist? Plants have been found to show sensitivity to sound, store information to be accessed later, and communicate among their kind. And we still have doubts as to their intelligence. And even in a sense with particular animals, we determine the intelligence in ourselves and certain other species through inference, by observing how an organism behaves, not by looking for psychological sign. If plants can do things that we consider indications of intelligence in animals, this camp of botanists argues, then why shouldn't we use the language of intelligence to describe them too? And this is the heart of this discussion, which is, for whatever reason, the scientific community moves the goalpost whenever plants get close to it. So as plants show themselves to be and to go beyond any of the markers that we use for human intelligence and for animal intelligence, all of a sudden plants get like, it's like, oh no, that's not the indicator. It still remains the indicator for animals, by the way. It's just no longer the indicator for plants. Riddle me that back, man. Explain to me why that's happening. Makes no sense whatsoever. Hold on, let me make this a little bit bigger. It's a daring question. Is it really? Is it a daring question? It just seems like a normal question to me. I don't even think it's daring anymore. It might have been daring in 2006. It might have been daring in 2012. I don't think in 2024 it's daring anymore. Currently being debated in labs and academic journals. Not so long ago, treading even lightly in this domain could upend a scientist's career. And plenty of botanists still think that applying concepts such as consciousness to plants does a disservice to their essential plantness. And I disliked dislike right now that she just took Anthony Chihuahua's conversation piece. Like, this is very martyresque. This is Chihuahuas that are talking about the fact that plants actually are so much more, that's the reason why we shouldn't just use this term. So I find it a little bit of disservice in a way she explains it, that she says, she makes it seem as if consciousness to plants does a disservice to their essential plantness. I think she needs to put some context around this, that what they're saying is that it does a disservice because there's so much more than that, not a disservice to the terminology. I don't know if that makes it clear, but I just wanted to say that because it was a frustrating way. Yet even many of these scientists are awed by what we are learning about plants. See, the yet there implies that they think that they're not conscious. That is not true. Martyr, Chihuahuas, they think the plants are beyond that. They think that we don't have to dumb them down by using something like the way that we currently define consciousness and intelligence, which is a very dummied way of doing it based on what plants experience. And I find, I don't know, I was a little irked by that statement. A single book nearly snuffed out the field of plant behavior research for good. The Secret Life of Plants, published in 1973. What's it? I thought it was 1968. Maybe it was one of the editions. Was as popular as it was irresponsible. I really don't like this person's writing. How about it was cutting edge, and that they couldn't repeat the scientific studies because what Cleve Baxter was alluding to, what he was experiencing, came from his wideness, his openness to be able to look at plants in this way. And the scientists that came after him and tried to reproduce his studies came at it from a very mechanistic, biological perspective, and therefore were not able to reach the conclusions. Can we also admit that while it is true that maybe some of his tests weren't perfect, because again, Cleve Baxter worked for the CIA, not as a scientist, but as a person who was a specialist in lie detection technology, is it possible that scientists didn't want to find the same responses? I don't know. Today I'm a little bit punchy because I am kind of getting sick of how we keep having to take 2 steps forwards and 1 step back. We get so far and then somebody new enters the picture and they have to like drag us back. It drives me bonkers. Oh. Though it included real science, it also featured wildly unscientific projection. Says who? Or beyond its time. One chapter suggested that plants could feel and hear, that they preferred Beethoven to rock and roll, which biologically speaking, or frequency-wise, there is a logic there, which they didn't understand at the time. Another suggested a plant can respond to malevolent thoughts. Many scientists tried to reproduce the most tantalizing research. Okay, excuse me, you can't say some are debating plant intelligence, the word some, which implies a small number, and then say many tried to reproduce. That is not true, not many. Some tried to reproduce, and many are now having this conversation. Invert the words, because your words, Zoe, no. I'm sorry, I'm punchy because I'm tired of the plants having to, if we as women have had to work and continue to work doubly as hard to get recognition of things, plants have to work like quadruply to get that recognition. According to several researchers I spoke with, this caused the twin gatekeeping of science funding boards and peer review boards to become skittish about plant behavior studies. Proposals, isn't that a problem with the freaking board, the boards? Because wouldn't you think that they would be curious and interested in funding this area of research to see? Proposals with so much as a whiff of inquiry into the subject were turned down. Again, this isn't a problem of scientists from the perspective of their curiosity and the ability to push the envelope. This is a problem of the funding boards. Pioneers in the field changed course and left the sciences altogether. Give me names. I hope that your book really cites names, because a decade after the book's publication, a paper by David Rhodes, a zoologist and chemist at the University of Washington, reopened questions of plant communication. Okay, I'm just going to keep reading. Rhodes had watched the nearby forest be decimated by an invasion of caterpillars, but then something suddenly changed. The caterpillars began to die. Why? The answer Rhodes discovered was that the trees were communicating with one another. I need to go look up and see which paper she's talking about. The year. Does this link? Where does this link work? Sorry. Oh, dang, this takes me back. Okay, sorry. So this is a 1983 paper. Sorry about that, folks. I did not mean to click it in that way. I was hoping to open it. 1983 paper. Okay. Let's see. The answer Rhodes discovered was that trees were communicating with one another. Trees that the caterpillars hadn't yet reached were ready. They changed their composition of their leaves, turning them into weapons that would poison and eventually kill caterpillars, which is also similar to a paper that we reviewed here that was the same thing that was happening with, I think it was antelope that was happening in Africa when the plants who were suffering from extreme drought upped their levels of tannins in order to kill off some of the antelope that were eating them so that there could be a better balance so that they could survive through it. Pretty clever little folks, huh? Scientists were beginning to understand that trees communicate through their roots, but this was different. The trees were too far apart to be connected by the root system. We're signaling to one another through the air. Plants are tremendous at chemical synthesis. Rhodes knew. And certain plant chemical drifts through the air. Everyone already understood that ripening fruit produces airborne ethylene, for example, which prompts nearby fruit to ripen. It wasn't unreasonable to imagine that plant chemicals containing other information, say that the forest was under attack, might also drift through the air. Still, the idea that a plant would defend itself in this way was heretical to the whole premise of how scientists thought plants worked. Yeah, they worked by being dumb, by just being inert. Plants were not supposed to be that active or active at all. They weren't supposed to have agency. They weren't supposed to know themselves or know their environment or have such dramatic or strategic reactions. Rhodes presented his hypothesis at conferences, but mainstream scientific journals were reluctant to take the risk of publishing something so outlandish. Is it really that outlandish, though? Is it really? The discovery ended up buried in an obscure volume, and Rhodes was ridiculed by peers in journals and at conferences. Haven't we seen tons of that? Or Susan Simard, Monica Galliano. I mean, there's a list. But Rhodes' communication experiments and others that came immediately after helped establish a new line of inquiry. We now know that plant chemical signals are decipherable not just by other plants, but in some cases by insects. Still, 4 decades on, the idea that plants might communicate intentionally with one another remains a controversial concept in botany. Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, it is. And it's very frustrating that it is. One key problem is that there is no agreed upon definition of communication, not even in animals. So it's kind of like porn. You just know it when you see it. Does the signal need to be sent purposely? Does it need to provoke a response in the receiver? Much as consciousness and intelligence have no settled definitions. Can you believe that we are arguing about terms like communication, consciousness, intelligence, and we're saying that these don't have any kind of settled definition? I can understand that there's no definition to, or there's no agreed upon mechanism for consciousness, or even intelligence, or even communication. But is there no understanding of what it is? Or is it just that you don't want to settle on a definition to then just have to be proven that plants can do it? I think we know which is the answer there. I think we know. Wait. Communication slides between the realms of philosophy and science, finding secure footing in neither. Intention poses the hardest of problems because it cannot be directly determined. The likely impossibility of establishing, so annoying this thing. The likely impossibility of establishing intentionality in plants, though, is no deterrent to Simon Gilroy's sense of wonder at their liveliness. In the 1980s, Gilroy, who's British, studied at Edinburgh University under Anthony Trewavas, which we love. We love Trewavas. Although he is pretty, I like it because he's not a straight, like, you think you understand his philosophy, and then all of a sudden he switches it on you, and you're like, yes, yes. A renowned plant physiologist. Since then, Trewavas has begun using provocative, the same thing with Michael Martyr, by the way, he's the same. It's like you think you get him, and then all of a sudden he takes you in another realm, and you're like, whoa. You realize he's still thinking so much. Anyways, Ruabas has begun using provocative language to talk about plants, aligning himself with a group of botanists and biologists who call themselves plant neurobiologists, and publishing papers and a book laying out scientific arguments in favor of plant intelligence and consciousness, many of which we've covered here in this plant consciousness commentary. Gilroy himself is more circumspect, unwilling to talk about either of those things, but he still works with Ruabas because Gilroy is still getting a lot of government funding, especially for science-related work, space-related work with plants and how plants can help colonize new planets. That's another reason. Gilroy's super cool, though, by the way. He's kind of a out there thinking. He looks a little bit like a mad scientist. If you ever go look him up, Simon Gilroy, and his laboratory is super cool in the work that they do, but he does do a lot of government work. So he has to kind of like, he gets a lot of funding for the work that he does, but I still think he's super cool. Recently, the two have been developing a theory of agency for plants. Gilroy is quick to remind me that he's talking strictly about biological agency. Can't say that plants are intelligent and agents, like consciously aware enough to make decisions, because then we'd have to give them rights. And if we give them rights, we'd have to start thinking about, I don't know, the way we grow plants, the way we think about plants, the way we use plants, the way we do things with plants. It would require a wee bit amount of change, like everything. Not implying intention in a thoughts and feeling sense. But there's no question that plants engage in the active pursuit of their own goals and, in the process, shape the very environment they find themselves rooted in. That, for him, is proof of plant agency. Still, the proof is found through inferring the meaning behind plant actions rather than understanding the mechanics. This is a big piece. This is a big piece because we tend to try, when it comes to plants, to look at the mechanics, the actual what's happening at the cellular level. When we talk about agency for other beings, especially humans, or other beings that we feel we cannot necessarily dissect so easily, like, I don't know, dogs and cats, then we start to look at behavior and we start to look at the actions that they take. This is a huge, huge, huge point of differentiation between the way that we work with one or the other. When we talk about plant agency, plant consciousness, plant intelligence, the current understanding and way that we're moving, except for people like, well, actually, I'll get there in a second, is to go down mechanistic science, right? Let me dissect and let me see what's happening, the glutamate that's going on, which is what Gilroy himself is doing, what's going on relating to the way that the cell membranes respond, all these different aspects. The thing, though, is that when you're talking about consciousness in animals, you tend to talk about behaviors. You know, you do this action and you get this response. You try to read cues, and you have an entire cognition side or a psychological side that you investigate. This is not happening with plants, except for in a very small grouping of people, which is why Monica Galeano got ridiculed in a lot of aspects, although she has had the opportunity to do a lot of different things. But this is a big differentiation in that we don't look at the behavior of plants and then assume agency and action and intentionality from there, because we cannot read their bodily cues as easily as we can an animal who we ascribe human definitions to. Hopefully that makes sense. When you get down to the machinery that allows those calculations to occur, we don't have the luxury of going, it's neurons in the brain. Gilroy told me. His work is beginning to allow us to watch the information processing happen. In other words, because plants don't have the same mechanisms that we as humans do, we do not want to give them the same levels of understanding that we do. But at the moment, we don't know how it works. That is the essential question of plant intelligence. How does something without a brain coordinate response to stimuli? I don't know. Can we just first say that they're doing it regardless of whether we understand how? Can we just agree that they are doing it, that kin are doing it? How does information about the world get translated into action that benefits the plant? How can the plant sense its world without centralized place to parse the information? I don't know, but it's always done it. Plants have always understood their environment much more detailed than we as humans do. And why do we need to have a central processor for that? A few years back, Gilroy and his colleagues, Masatsugu Toyota, thought they'd have a go at those questions. which led them to the experiment I participated in at the lab. Their work has shown that those glowing green signals move much faster than would be expected from single diffusion. They move at the speed of some electrical signals, which they may be, or as new research suggests, they may be surprisingly fast chemical signals. Given what we know about the dynamics of sensing in creatures that have a brain, the lack of one should mean that any information generated from sensing ought to ripple meaninglessly through the plant body without producing more than a highly localized response. But it doesn't. A tobacco plant touched in one place will experience that stimulus through its whole body. The system overall works a bit like an animal nervous system. Or maybe it works, since plants are older, maybe your categorization is wrong, and might even employ similar molecular players. Or maybe the animal nervous system is implying similar players to what the plant does. Gilroy, for his part, does not want to call it a nervous system, understanding, but others have written that he and Toyota have found nervous system-like signaling in plants. This issue has even leaked out of plant science. Researchers from other disciplines are weighing in. Rodolfo Llinás, a neuroscientist, of course, a human neuroscientist, let's be specific, a human neuroscientist at NYU, and Sergio Miguel Tomé, a colleague at the University of Salamanca in Spain, have argued that it makes no sense to define a nervous system of something only animals can have, rather than defining it as a physiological system that could be present in other organisms in different forms. This is the paper we're going to talk about after this. Convergent evolution, they argue, wherein organisms separately evolve similar systems to deal with similar challenges, happens all the time. A classic example is wings. Flight evolves separately in birds, bats, and insects, but to comparable effect. Eyes are another example. Eye lens have evolved separately several times. Why do we recognize that the eyes, quote unquote, of a fly, which are very different from the way that the human eye works, and physically looks and such, and the different apparatus has so many more parts, and yet we still think of them both as seeing mechanisms. But plants, we don't recognize any other stuff because it's so separate. The nervous system can reasonably imagine as another case of convergent evolution. Llinás and Miguel Tomé say, if a variety of nervous systems exist in nature, then what plants have is clearly one. Why not call it a nervous system already, right? What do you mean the flower remembers? I ask. It's 2019 and I'm walking through the Berlin Botanic Garden, not me, the author, with Thilo Henning, a plant researcher. Henning shakes his head and laughs. He doesn't know. No one does. But yes, he says, he and his colleagues, Maximilian Weigand, the director of a botanical garden in Bonn, have observed the ability of Nasa poissoniana, a plant in the flowering Loasaceae family that grows in the Peruvian Andes, to store and recall information. The pair noticed that the multicolored starburst-shaped flowers were raising their stamen or fertilizing organs shortly before a pollinator arrived, as if they could predict the future. The researchers set up an experiment and found that the plant, in fact, seemed to be learning from the experience. These flowers, Henning and Weigand found, could remember that word, by the way, remember, the time intervals between bee visits, anticipate the time their next pollinator was likely to arrive. If the interval between the bee visits changed, the plant might actually adjust the timing of its stamen display to line up with the new schedule. Remembering. We still struggle with calling plants intelligent. Explain to me why, again. Explain. Please. In a 2019 paper, Henning and Weigand called NASA's behavior intelligent. The word still appearing in quotation marks. I want to know what Henning really thinks. Are plants intelligent? Does he see the flower's apparent ability to remember as a hallmark of consciousness? Or does he think of a plant as an unconscious robot with a pre-programmed suite of responses? Henning shakes off my question the first 2 times I ask it, but the 3rd time he stops walking and turns to answer. The dissenting papers, he says, are all focused on the lack of brains. No brains, they claim, means no intelligence. Plants don't have these structures, obviously, but look at what they do. I mean, they take information from the outside world, they process, they make decisions, and they perform. They take everything into account and they transform it into a reaction. And this, to me, is the basic definition of intelligence. That's not just automatism, sorry. There might be some automatic things like going toward light, achieving that. But this is not the case here. It's not automatic. Where NASA's memories could possibly be stored is still a mystery. Maybe we're just not able to see these structures. Henning tells me maybe they are so spread all over the body that there isn't a single structure. Maybe that's the trick or the key, I would say. I would use that. Maybe it's the whole organism. Maybe we are almost like too blind to see this whole thing because it's so different from who we are. It's that whole concept that if it's not within my realm of consciousness, I can't even begin to see it, much less understand it. I think that that's how it is with plants. It's so beyond our realm that we are not this elite kind of organism with this brain thing that is the most important thing. And that's so frustrating. It's humbling to remember that plants are a kingdom of life entirely their own, the product of riotous evolutionary innovation that took a turn away from our branch of life when we were both barely motile, single-celled creatures floating in the prehistoric ocean. We couldn't be more biologically different, and yet plant patterns, rhythms, have resonances with our own. Just look at the information moving with Gilroy's going, honey, honey, honey. Sorry, that was kind of demeaning. I didn't mean it. But lady, your language is it's putting it backwards. And yet plants, patterns, rhythms, and resonance have resonances with our own. No. And yet humans' patterns and rhythms have resonances with plants. It is the plants that came first. They didn't take a dive away from our branch. We are the younger species. We human beings are younger. I don't understand. I want us to write something from that perspective, understanding that plants are the adults. They are the elders, and we should treat them that way. And that we should talk about it from the perspective of not comparing everything to us, but comparing us to them. I want to see this. If anybody is a writer and you have a chance to write something like this, I want to read it, please, please. Mysteries abide, of course. We are far from understanding the extent of memory in plants. We have a few clues and fewer answers, and so many more experiments still to try. The Light Eater, that's the name of her book. The Light Eater is how the unseen world of plant intelligence offers a new understanding of life on Earth. So, I want you to hold this in mind. Well, I need to plug in my computer. I want you to hold everything that Zoe just said in mind for a second while I take you over to our next paper. Let me just prep it correctly so that we have it, because this is a continuation. Again, she talks about it a little bit in the paper itself, but I want us to be able to, yeah, here it is. Okay. So this is the paper that she actually mentions in this. I don't remember how long this paper is. Should have done that. Hold on a second. Okay. Let's see if we can hopefully get through this paper today. We might jump around a little bit of it because it's long, but we'll see. So this is, and it's technical and it has those bits. So this is a paper. This is the one that she was talking about by Sergio Miguel Tomé and Rodolfo Ginas. So these are two researchers in the Department of Neuroscience and Physiology and NYU School of Medicine. So this was something that came out in 2021. So again, when she says, recently, I don't know how recent it is, but anyway. So let's get into this one because I'm super curious as to what it is. As I said, I'm away from home right now, and so if I have to cut this short, I apologize. I'm going to try to go as long as I can. I am at a friend's house and I'm kind of waiting for her to show up, and we have plans for later. But hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. Actually, we should be okay. Okay. Most textbook definitions recognize only animals as having nervous systems. However, for the past couple of decades, botanists have been meticulously studying long-distance signaling systems in plants. And some researchers have stated that plants have a simple nervous system. Thus, an academic conflict has emerged between those who defend and those who deny the existence of a nervous system in plants. This article analyzes that debate, and we propose an alternative to answering yes or no, broadening the definition of a nervous system to include plants. We claim that a definition broader than the current one, which is based only on a phylogenetic viewpoint, would be helpful in obtaining deeper understanding of how evolution has driven the features of signal generation, transmission, processing, multicellular beings. Okay, let me just kind of let me finish the sentence and then I'll tell you. Also, we propose two possible definitions and exemplify how broader definition allows for new viewpoints on the evolution of plants, animals, and the nervous system. This is a very important paper because, as you know, we've had this conversation so many times before, that in talking about nervous systems, which is the heart of why certain types of scientists do or do not recognize plants for who they are and for what they are able to do, it is all because everything has been concentrated through the brain. This paper is an alternative approach, which I appreciate, that says, I'm going to give you a story. I'm going to give you a story that I think illustrates something. And I hope you understand this story based on what I'm going to tell you about this story. Like, I hope you will understand it for its positivity. My mother and I once had a very long conversation at one point about gay marriage. And my mother and I had a big conversation because at the time, my mother was not necessarily my mother has always had many, many gay friends without, never would have thought anything about anything. We grew up with all kinds of people around us. And then one day we were talking about marriage and the conversation of gay marriage came up and my mother was like, I'm not for gay marriage. And I looked at her like a double take because you're like, what are you talking about? Huh? How do you not like what? And I couldn't understand it because, again, I grew up with my mother who had all these friends, gay friends, gay, straight, whatever. My mother has never really cared. So it did make sense to me. And in having a conversation with her with curiosity, I understood that she wasn't against gay marriage, the idea of a union or even a legally binding union between it. It was the word marriage that she was struggling with. My mother, by this point, had several years before chosen, because my mother has studied everything. She's been in, metaphysics and in, different forms of religion and in non-religion. She's done a little bit of everything. And she, at one point, at her own volition, chose to be a Baptist. And at the time, she was much more strict back then. But at the time, she was like, marriage is between a man and a woman. And that is the definition. And it's a man and a woman married in a church. Like, not just a man and a woman. It's a man and a woman married in a church. And I looked at her and I was like, so wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that your problem is the word? She's like, yeah. And I was like, you mean that if we got rid of all ceremonies that happen legally and we called them all just, unions, just to throw a word out, okay? Everybody, straight people, gay people, trans people, all kinds of people, every person who chooses to legally have a union, and then anything you do outside of that, you call whatever the hell you want. Like, if you're in a church, you call it a marriage. If you are pagan, you might call it a hand fasting. You call whatever you want to call, whatever words work for you based on your thing. But from what the government proposes, again, we're talking about my mother at the time, what the government proposes, it's equal to everybody and it's called a union. and we strip out all of the connotations that for her were religious. I sat there for a minute and I thought about it and I was like, huh, it's an interesting concept because it would eliminate, because she wasn't saying we call it a marriage for some and we call it this for others. That's not what she was saying. She was saying everybody from a legal perspective stands in front of a legal entity and gets a union. And then you have whatever other kind of ceremony you want, and that ceremony, you call it whatever it is based on your tradition, but it's not mandated that everybody has to call it something. You call it whatever you want to call it. And I got to say, I felt like it was super intelligent, the idea that she was saying, let's get out of the conversation of the word and let's neutralize the term and allow words to be used in a much more flexible way. And we find a neutral term for everything. I think in some ways, that is what this paper is trying to say. What this paper is trying to say is that everybody has a transmission system. Every living being has a system that allows you to move information through. And that if we stopped calling it a nervous system for everybody for a second, and we looked at the functions of what they do and how they carries it out, we would recognize that that there are many more species that have this type of I'm going to call it a transmission. I don't know what he calls them yet, because they call them yet, because we haven't gotten to the paper, because I'm still yapping. They call it a transmission system of some sort. Therefore, why don't we just call it a whatever generic term, and then we can have and create words that are nervous system over here and this over there and those over there. But we know, kind of like my mother's theory of everybody is in union legally. And then in the eyes of whomever it is that you think is important, your friends, your divinity, your God, your, whatever, cats and dogs, you can call it whatever it is, hand fasting, marriage, ceremony, wedlock, blah, blah, blah. I think this is actually really smart. I think we need to do a little bit more of this. I think if we started to take certain terminology and remove out what is some of these terms, this would be better. Now, that being said, I'm going to say something that might not be popular right now. Given the fact that I am not home right now and that things are a little bit like I feel really in this weird space with this light and whatever, and this is such an important topic, I want you to bear with me. I think I'm going to end this live stream here today. I know we haven't been going the normal time we normally go. I'm sure we can go much longer and such, but I want to give this particular topic the space it deserves. So if it's okay with you, I am going to end this stream today here, and I'm going to pick it up again as soon as I can. It might not even go all the way till Friday. I'll announce it as soon as I know when I'm going to be able to do it, because I want to take the time with this. And I don't feel like I can take the time with it right now. I feel like if I start getting into this right now, it is going to, I'm going to be distracted by I'm worrying about when my friend is going to show up and that we have plans for dinner and all these other pieces. Life just got in the way. So I hope that's okay with you. I think that this is such an important topic that I actually want to give it the space and time that it deserves. So we're going to end this right here. We're going to then pick this back up next week, and we're going to go in depth into the broader definition of the nervous system. This also will give me some time to see if there are other papers that share this sentiment, because I'm very curious at this topic. I don't normally look up nervous systems. I have searches for a whole series of other terms that are around intelligence and consciousness and all kinds of stuff. But the idea of the definition of a nervous system has not something that I'm searching for. So I actually also want to do some research. I don't want to necessarily read this paper through because, I like to do the reading with you, but I do want to see if there's a few other topics on this, because I feel like it's an important enough topic that we should have more. And I feel like there's probably somebody else that's talking with it. So with that, I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna stop it right here, because I feel like I just really want to give it the space. I want to give it the space and the time that it has. So thank you so much for understanding that. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this with you next week when we do this. Again, I keep saying to you, I'm looking for more times when I can do these, commentaries, because there are so many papers coming out. And I just need to make my schedule. I just need to do it. I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to do it. It's, one of my multipotentialites on my list of multipotentialite things. I have a few really big announcements that are going to be coming up soon for some new interactive programs that I have, and I'm really excited to share them with you. So this will also give me a chance to kind of prep everything. So with that, I want to thank you all. Remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. This is me, Tigria Gardenia, your nature-inspired mentor and certified life coach. And I'm out. I'm out for now. Bye, everyone. Bye.